The mountain's daughter. The porcelain bowl shattered across the kitchen floor, and 16-year-old Mara knew what came next. But when her stepmother's hand connected with her face for the third time that morning, neither of them heard the knock at the door or saw the mountain man watching through the window. Cole Wilder hadn't come down from the high country in 6 months, and he never interfered in town business. Until today. What he witnessed through that frost-edged glass would shatter more than porcelain. It would break open secrets this respectable frontier household had kept for 3 long years. Welcome to this story of survival, redemption, and the fierce kind of rescue that doesn't arrive on a white horse. Stay with me until the very end, and if this story moves you, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Mara's journey travels. Now, let's begin where all transformations do, at the breaking point. The November wind rattled the windows of the Hartwell house, carrying with it the smell of snow that hadn't yet fallen. Mara's hands were red and chapped as she worked the washboard, her knuckles raw from the lye soap and cold water. The kitchen was warm from the stove, but that warmth never seemed to reach her bones anymore. She'd been up since before dawn, the way she had been every day for the past 3 years, since her father married Vivian Fletcher and brought her into their home like a blessing. In town, everyone still talked about how lucky Elias Hartwell was to find such a refined woman willing to settle in a rough freight town like Coleridge. Vivian wore her silk dresses to church, kept her blonde hair perfectly pinned, spoke in a voice like honey over warm bread. Behind the door of the Hartwell house, Vivian Fletcher was something else entirely. Mara heard the bedroom door open upstairs and felt her stomach tighten. She scrubbed faster, trying to finish the last of the breakfast dishes before Vivian came down. The porcelain bowl, her mother's bowl, one of the few things Mara had left from before, sat on the drying board, and she reached for it with hands that trembled slightly. The bowl slipped. It happened so fast. One moment it was in her hands, the next it was tumbling toward the floor, and Mara's desperate grab only sent it spinning faster. The sound of it shattering against the wooden planks was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. Mara dropped to her knees immediately, gathering the pieces with shaking fingers. Maybe she could fix it. Maybe if she was careful, if she used hide glue, if she... "What have you done?" Vivian's voice was still honey-sweet, but there was something underneath it now, something cold and sharp as January ice. Mara looked up to find her stepmother standing in the doorway, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, her blue eyes taking in the scene with an expression that made Mara's chest constrict. "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "It slipped. I didn't what? Didn't mean to destroy one of the few valuable things in this house?" Vivian moved closer, her skirts rustling. "Didn't mean to prove once again that you're as clumsy and worthless as I've always said. I'll fix it. I can glue—" The slap came without warning, sharp enough to snap Mara's head to the side. Her cheek blazed with heat, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. "You'll do no such thing," Vivian said, her voice never rising above that terrible sweetness. "That bowl was worth more than you'll ever be. Do you understand me? Your mother might have treasured it, but your mother had poor judgment in many things, including thinking a girl like you deserved nice things." Mara stayed on her knees, one hand pressed to her burning cheek, porcelain shards cutting into her other palm. She'd learned not to argue. Arguments only made it worse. "Stand up," Vivian commanded. Mara stood, carefully, trying not to step on the broken pieces. Her stepmother circled her slowly, the way a hawk circles something small and wounded. "Look at you. 16 years old and still worthless. Can't keep a simple bowl from breaking. Can't keep your hair neat. Can't walk through a room without knocking something over." Vivian's hand shot out and grabbed Mara's braid, yanking her head back. "Can't even stand up straight without slouching like some common field hand." Mara bit her lip to keep from crying out. Tears would make it worse. Crying always made it worse. "I've tried," Vivian continued, her breath hot against Mara's ear. "Lord knows I've tried to make something decent out of you. But you're just like your father, stubborn, simple, suited for nothing but rough work and rougher company." She released Mara's hair with a shove that sent the girl stumbling backward. Mara's boot came down on a porcelain shard, and even through the leather she felt it crack. "Clean this up," Vivian said, smoothing her skirts. "And when you're done, you'll scrub the floor. On your hands and knees. I want to see my reflection in these boards by the time your father gets home tomorrow. Maybe that will teach you to be more careful with things that don't belong to you." She turned toward the parlor, then paused. "Oh, and Mara, you'll do it without supper tonight. We can't afford to waste food on girls who destroy valuable property." Mara waited until she heard the parlor door close before she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hand shook as she bent to gather the porcelain pieces. The bowl had been her mother's, pale blue with tiny painted flowers, brought all the way from Boston when her parents first married. Mara remembered her mother serving soup in it on cold nights, remembered the weight of it, the way the candlelight made the glaze glow. Now it was just sharp edges and lost memories. She was on her knees, sweeping the smallest fragments into her apron, when she heard the knock. The sound was so unexpected that Mara froze. They never had visitors. Vivian didn't socialize with the rough freight families in Coleridge, and her father was gone 3 weeks out of 4, hauling goods to the mining camps in the high country. The knock came again, heavier this time. Vivian's voice carried from the parlor, still sweet, still controlled. "Mara, answer the door, and do try not to embarrass me in front of whoever's calling." Mara rose, brushing porcelain dust from her apron, and crossed to the front door. Her cheek still burned where Vivian had struck her, and she knew without looking that it would be red and swelling. She opened the door just enough to see out. The man on the porch was not someone she expected. Cole Wilder stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who lived hard lives in unforgiving country. His dark hair was long enough to touch his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. He wore buckskin and fur, and he smelled like pine smoke and winter air. His eyes, pale gray, like storm clouds, fixed on Mara's face with an intensity that made her want to step back. Everyone in Coleridge knew Cole Wilder, though few could claim to know him well. He lived somewhere up in the high country, came down maybe 3 or 4 times a year to trade furs and buy supplies, then disappeared back into the mountains. People said he'd been a trapper, a scout, maybe a soldier before that. He never stayed in town longer than necessary, never drank in the saloon, never attended church or social gatherings. He was watching her now with an expression she couldn't read. "Mr. Wilder," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I help you?" His eyes moved from her face to her hands, where blood was welling up from a cut she hadn't noticed. Then his gaze shifted, looking past her into the house, and something changed in his expression, something that made the air feel suddenly colder. "I heard," he said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse, each word deliberate. "Through the window. I was walking past, and I heard." Mara's heart stopped. The kitchen window faced the side street. If he'd been passing by, if he'd heard— "I don't know what you mean," she said quickly, but her hand moved instinctively to her burning cheek. "Yes, you do." Cole's gray eyes held hers. "And I saw enough to know it wasn't the first time." "Mara?" Vivian's voice called from inside, sharp now, despite its sweetness. "Who is it?" Cole didn't move from the doorway. "I'd like to speak with Mrs. Hartwell," he said, loud enough to carry. Mara heard her stepmother's footsteps, and a moment later Vivian appeared in the hallway behind her. The change was instantaneous, the hard edges smoothed away, replaced by the gracious lady of the house. "Mr. Wilder," Vivian said warmly, moving past Mara to stand in the doorway. "What an unexpected pleasure. We don't often see you in town. How can we help you?" Cole's expression didn't change. "I'd like to speak with you, ma'am, about the girl." Something flickered in Vivian's eyes, but her smile never wavered. "Mara? Is there a problem?" "That depends on your definition of problem," Cole said. The words were quiet, but there was steel underneath them. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Hartwell. One that might benefit everyone involved." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained pleasant. "How intriguing. Please, come in. Mara, fetch some coffee for our guest." Mara moved toward the kitchen automatically, years of obedience making her feet move even as her mind raced. What had Cole Wilder heard? What had he seen? And why, after years of keeping himself separate from town business, was he here now? She prepared the coffee with shaking hands, listening to the murmur of voices from the parlor. When she brought the tray in, Vivian was seated in her best chair, posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. Cole had refused a seat and stood near the window, his bulk making the tidy parlor seem suddenly small. "Thank you, Mara," Vivian said sweetly. "You may go finish your chores now." "Actually," Cole said, "I'd like her to stay. This concerns her." Vivian's smile tightened, but she gestured graciously. "Of course. Mara, sit." Mara perched on the edge of a wooden chair, her hands clenched in her apron. Cole was watching her again with that unreadable expression, and she felt heat creep up her neck. "Mrs. Hartwell," Cole began, turning his attention to Vivian, "I'll be direct. I live alone up in the high country. It's hard living, and there are things, cooking, mending, keeping house, that I'm not good at. I need help." Vivian's eyebrows rose delicately. "I see. And you're looking for a housekeeper?" "Not exactly." Cole's gray eyes remained steady. "I'm looking to take the girl, permanently." The silence that followed was absolute. Mara's mind went blank. Vivian sat perfectly still, but something was working behind her eyes, something calculating and quick. "Take her," Vivian repeated slowly. "You mean, adopt her? As a ward?" "Call it what you want," Cole said. "I'll provide for her, teach her mountain skills, give her a roof and food and safety. In return, she helps with the work that needs doing. When she's old enough, if she wants to leave, she can. Until then, she stays with me." Vivian's fingers tapped once against the arm of her chair, the only sign of the thoughts racing through her mind. Mara watched her stepmother's face and saw the exact moment when the idea took root. This was an opportunity, a way to be rid of Mara, without scandal, without questions. A respectable arrangement with a known, if solitary, man. "Mr. Wilder," Vivian said carefully, "this is quite sudden. Mara is my stepdaughter, and while she has her challenges, I've done my best to raise her properly. Taking her to live in the wilderness, away from civilization and proper society—" "Ma'am," Cole interrupted, his voice still quiet but with an edge now. "I don't think proper society has done much for her." Vivian's eyes flashed, but her smile remained. "You've made your proposition clear, Mr. Wilder. However, Mara's father is her guardian, not I. Any such arrangement would require his consent." "When's he due back?" "Tomorrow evening." Cole nodded slowly. "Then I'll return tomorrow evening. And Mrs. Hartwell?" He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Mara. "Until then, I'd consider it a personal favor if the girl remained unharmed." The words hung in the air like smoke. Vivian rose smoothly, her gracious mask firmly in place. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mr. Wilder. Mara is perfectly safe here." Cole's gray eyes moved from Vivian to Mara's reddened cheek, to her cut hands, to the way she sat hunched and small in the chair. He didn't say anything else. He simply turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Vivian closed it with a soft click, then stood with her back to the wood for a long moment. When she turned to face Mara, her expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "Well," she said quietly, "that was unexpected." Mara didn't move. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to think. Cole Wilder wanted to take her away, to the mountains, away from Vivian's perfect parlor and cold eyes and sudden slaps. "Your father will decide, of course," Vivian continued, moving back to her chair with perfect composure. "But I think, yes, I think this might be exactly what you need, Mara. A fresh start. Somewhere suited to your particular temperament." She was already planning it, Mara realized. Already figuring out how to spin this to Elias, how to make it sound like a generous opportunity rather than an exile. "Go finish your chores," Vivian said dismissively. "And do try to think about Mr. Wilder's offer seriously. It's more than a girl like you deserves." Mara fled to the kitchen, her mind spinning. Through the window, she could see Cole Wilder's broad back as he walked down the street toward the trading post. He'd heard, he'd seen, and somehow that mountain man she'd never spoken to in her life had decided to interfere. She didn't know if she should feel terrified or grateful. That night, Vivian was almost pleasant at dinner, though Mara noticed she still wasn't given any portion. She worked until the floor gleamed, until her back ached and her hands bled from the scrubbing. When she finally climbed to her small room in the attic, she lay awake for hours, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Tomorrow her father would come home. Tomorrow Cole Wilder would return. Tomorrow her life might change in ways she couldn't imagine. She touched her swollen cheek in the darkness and wondered what the mountains were like in winter. Wondered if they were colder than this house had ever been. Wondered if anything could be worse than the life she was already living. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams about gray eyes and steep trails and a voice that said, "I heard, I saw." And somewhere in those dreams, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. The wagon rolled into Coleridge just as the sun was setting, painting the rough wooden storefronts in shades of orange and gold. Elias Hartwell was bone-tired from 2 weeks on the mountain roads, his shoulders aching from handling the team through early snow and treacherous passes. But the sight of home, lamplight glowing in the windows of his house, made him sit straighter on the bench. He'd brought good money this time. The mining camps were paying premium rates for winter supplies, and he'd pushed hard to make an extra run before the high passes closed completely. Vivian would be pleased. She'd been talking about new curtains for the parlor, maybe a proper china set to replace the mismatched pieces they'd been using. As he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, the door opened and Vivian appeared, silhouetted against the warm interior light. She looked beautiful as always, her dress crisp despite the late hour, her hair perfectly arranged. "Elias," she called warmly. "Thank heavens you're home safe. I was beginning to worry." He climbed down stiffly, his joints protesting after hours on the wagon bench. Vivian met him at the steps, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek in that proper way she had. Her hands were soft when they touched his arm, so different from the rough calluses he'd developed over years of handling reins and freight. "Good run?" she asked, guiding him inside. "Better than good." He followed her into the warmth, already loosening his coat. "The camps are desperate for supplies before the snow really hits. I cleared nearly double what I expected." "How wonderful." Vivian helped him out of his coat, hanging it on the peg by the door. "You must be exhausted. Sit, and I'll bring you something to eat." It wasn't until he settled into his chair in the parlor that Elias noticed the quiet. "Where's Mara?" "Upstairs," Vivian said smoothly. "She's been a bit under the weather today. Nothing serious, just a headache. I thought it best she rest." Elias frowned. Mara was never sick. The girl was sturdy as a young pine, despite her slight build. "Should I check on her?" "After you eat," Vivian said firmly. "You need to keep your strength up. Besides, there's something we need to discuss first. Something important." The way she said it made Elias's stomach tighten. He'd been married to Vivian long enough to recognize that tone, the one she used when she'd been planning something, working through problems he hadn't even known existed. She brought him stew and fresh bread, and while he ate, she told him about Cole Wilder's visit. Elias listened, his spoon growing still in his hand. "He wants to take Mara to the mountains?" That's what he said. Vivian settled into her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "At first I was shocked, appalled really, but the more I've thought about it, Elias, the more I think it might be exactly what Mara needs." "But what she needs?" Elias set down his bowl, his appetite suddenly gone. "Vivian, she's 16 years old. Cole Wilder is a grown man, a stranger, living alone up in—" "He's offering her a future," Vivian interrupted gently. "Think about it, Elias. What does Mara have here? She's not suited for town life. She's clumsy, awkward around people. She can't seem to learn the skills she'd need to make a good match, to run a proper household. She's young yet. She's 16 and she still can't manage the simplest tasks without breaking things or making a mess." Vivian's voice was patient, reasonable. "You know I've tried, Elias. I've done everything I can to teach her, to mold her into someone who could make her way in society. But some girls just aren't meant for that life." Elias looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of freight work. He'd been gone so much these past 3 years, building up the business, trying to provide the life Vivian deserved. Maybe he hadn't noticed how much Mara was struggling. "The mountain life would suit her," Vivian continued. "Hard work, simple living. And Cole Wilder, for all his rough ways, is known to be honest. He'd teach her practical skills, hunting, trapping, survival, things she could actually learn, instead of constantly failing at being something she's not." "I don't know," Elias said slowly. "Taking her away from the only home she's known—" "Is it really home if she's miserable here?" Vivian asked softly. She leaned forward, her blue eyes earnest. "Elias, I know you don't see it. You're away so much, and when you're here, Mara puts on a brave face, but she's unhappy. She told me herself just yesterday that she feels trapped, that she wishes she could go somewhere she'd fit in better. Elias felt something crack in his chest. Mara had said that? His daughter, who looked so much like her mother that sometimes it hurt to see her, felt trapped in the house he'd worked so hard to provide? When is Wilder coming back? Tonight, Vivian said. He said he'd return this evening to hear your answer. Elias rubbed his face, exhaustion making his thoughts slow and muddy. I need to talk to Mara first. Of course. Vivian rose gracefully. I'll fetch her, but Elias, try to really listen to what she says. Not just the words, but what's underneath them. She's not like other girls. She needs something different. She left him alone in the parlor, and Elias sat in the growing darkness, trying to reconcile the image he had of his daughter with the struggling, unhappy girl Vivian described. Had he been so blind? So absent? Footsteps on the stairs announced Mara's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, and Elias felt his heart twist. She looked so small, so pale in the lamplight. Her hair was braided but messy, strands escaping around her face. And her cheek, what happened to your face? He was on his feet before he'd fully registered the reddish mark along her jaw. Mara's hand flew up instinctively to cover it. I walked into a cabinet door yesterday in the kitchen. It was stupid. Let me see. She dropped her hand reluctantly, and Elias studied the mark. It was fading now, more of a shadow than a bruise, but the shape was wrong somehow, not like something you'd get from a straight edge. Mara, he said quietly, Vivian told me about Cole Wilder's offer. Something flickered across his daughter's face, fear, maybe, or hope. He couldn't tell. What do you think about it? He asked. Mara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. What do you want me to say? The truth. Do you want to go with him? I don't know him. I don't know anything about mountain living or... She stopped, swallowed hard. But I don't want to keep being a disappointment here. The words hit Elias like a physical blow. You're not a disappointment, aren't I? Mara's eyes met his, and he saw something ancient and tired in them, something no 16-year-old should carry. I can't do anything right. I break things, I'm clumsy, I can't learn the way Vivian tries to teach me. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'd be better somewhere else. Before Elias could respond, there was a knock at the door. Vivian's voice drifted in from the hallway. That will be Mr. Wilder. Shall I show him in? Elias wanted to say no, wanted to send the mountain man away, keep his daughter here where he could protect her. But protect her from what? From a life she clearly wasn't thriving in? From lessons she couldn't seem to learn? Yes, he heard himself say. Show him in. Cole Wilder filled the doorway to the parlor, bringing with him the smell of pine and leather and the cold night air. His gray eyes went immediately to Mara, scanning her face with an intensity that made Elias straighten defensively. Mr. Hartwell, Cole said, his voice gravelly. Good to see you back safe. Wilder. Elias gestured to a chair, but Cole remained standing as he had the previous day. My wife tells me you made an unusual proposal. I did. Cole's gaze hadn't left Mara. And I'm still making it. Why? The question came out harsher than Elias intended. You don't know us. Don't know her. Why would you take on the burden of a half-grown girl? Because she needs out, Cole said bluntly. And because I could use the help. It's a fair trade. Fair trade? Elias felt anger starting to build in his chest. My daughter isn't livestock to be traded. No, Cole agreed. She's a person being hurt. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Vivian made a small sound of protest, but Cole's eyes remained on Elias. Excuse me? Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. I heard it, Cole said. Yesterday morning, I was walking past and I heard everything that happened in your kitchen, the bowl breaking, the things that were said after. Mara had gone white as snow. Vivian's expression was perfectly composed, but her hands had tightened on the arms of her chair. That's quite an accusation, Vivian said, her voice still honey-sweet. Based on what? Sounds through a window? Based on seeing a grown woman slap a child hard enough to leave a mark that's still visible a day later, Cole said flatly. Based on hearing words meant to tear down and destroy. Based on watching that girl right there. He nodded toward Mara. Flinch every time someone moves too quick near her. That's ridiculous, Vivian said, rising to her feet. Elias, this man is clearly disturbed. He's making wild allegations. Is he? Elias turned to his daughter. Mara, look at me. Mara raised her eyes, and Elias felt his world tilt. There was something there, something desperate and terrified and pleading all at once. Did she hit you? He asked. The silence stretched. Mara's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted to Vivian, then back to her father. It was discipline, Vivian said quickly. Sometimes children need correction, Elias. You know that. Mara can be willful, disobedient. I asked Mara. Elias's voice was harder now. Mara, did she hit you? Mara's voice cracked. Papa, I didn't mean to break the bowl. It was Mama's bowl, and I tried to catch it, but it slipped, and that's not what I asked. A tear slipped down Mara's cheek. She nodded once, quick and small. The anger that surged through Elias was white-hot and absolute. He turned on Vivian, who had gone very still. You struck my daughter. I disciplined a child who destroyed valuable property, Vivian said, her voice losing some of its sweetness. There's a difference. Is there? Elias took a step toward her. Show me the difference, Vivian. Explain to me how hitting a girl half your size for an accident is discipline. Elias, you're being unreasonable. Show me your arms, Mara. Mara shook her head mutely, her hands clutching her sleeves. Show me. With trembling fingers, Mara pushed up her left sleeve. The bruises were old, fading to yellow and green, but unmistakable. Finger marks on her upper arm. More marks on her wrist where she'd been grabbed and held. Elias felt something inside him shatter. How long? Papa, how long has this been happening? Mara's face crumpled. I didn't want you to know. I thought if I just tried harder, if I could learn to be better. Christ. Elias turned away, his hands shaking. All those trips, all those weeks away. And this was what he'd left his daughter to. This was what his new wife had been doing in his absence. Cole Wilder spoke quietly from his position by the window. It's not discipline when it leaves marks like that. It's not correction when a child learns to flinch before the blow lands. How dare you, Vivian said, rounding on him. You have no right to come into this house, to interfere in family matters. I have every right when I see a child being beaten. She was not beaten. Vivian's composure was cracking now, her voice rising. She was given appropriate consequences for her constant failures, her endless clumsiness, her complete inability to— Enough! Elias's voice cut through hers like a blade. I want you out. Vivian froze. What? Out of this house. Tonight. Elias, you can't be serious. This man, this stranger, makes wild accusations, and you just believe— I believe my daughter's arms, Elias said, his voice shaking with rage. I believe the bruises I can see with my own eyes. I believe that mark on her face that she lied to protect you. He moved to the door, yanked it open. Cold air rushed in. Get out. Pack whatever you can carry. I'll send the rest to wherever you decide to land, but I want you gone from here before I do something I'll regret. Vivian's face went through several expressions. Shock, fury, calculation. Finally, she drew herself up with icy dignity. You'll regret this, Elias Hartwell. When you're left alone with a daughter you don't know how to raise. When your business suffers because you have no proper wife to manage your household. I'll manage, Elias said flatly. Go. Vivian looked at Mara one last time, and the hatred in that glance made even Cole Wilder shift slightly. Then she swept from the room, her footsteps sharp on the stairs as she climbed to the bedroom. The three of them stood in awful silence. Mara was crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. Elias wanted to go to her, to hold her the way he had when she was small, but shame kept him frozen. How had he not seen? How had he been so blind? Mr. Hartwell, Cole said quietly, my offer still stands. Elias turned to face him. You want to take her away after all this? Especially after all this. Cole's gray eyes were steady. You're angry now, guilty. But guilt has a way of fading, and anger cools. In a month, maybe 2, you'll start remembering the good times with your wife, start questioning what really happened, start thinking maybe Mara exaggerated, maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I would never. Most men would, Cole said. It's human nature. And Mara would see it happening, and she'd learn to hide things even better next time. He paused. Or you'll find another wife eventually, someone to help with the house, the business, and the whole thing starts over. The words were brutal, but Elias couldn't argue with them. He knew himself well enough to fear that Cole might be right. So you're saying I can't protect my own daughter? I'm saying she needs protecting from what might happen as much as from what already did. Cole looked at Mara, his expression softening slightly. Up in the high country, there's no one to judge her, no one to call her clumsy or worthless, just hard work and clean air, and the chance to learn things that don't require being someone she's not. Elias heard the front door open and close upstairs. Vivian was leaving through the back, taking the route that wouldn't require her to face them again. Good. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her. Thin from missed meals, bruised from casual violence, terrified despite being in the presence of her own father. Mara, he said hoarsely, do you want to go with him? Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know if I can do it. Mountain living, I mean. I'm not strong. I'm not. You're stronger than you think, Cole interrupted. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about getting back up after you do. She looked at him with those wide, frightened eyes. You really heard everything? Yesterday? Every word. And you came back anyway? I came back because of it. Something in Mara's expression shifted. She turned to her father. I want to go, Papa. I want to try. Elias felt his heart crack clean through. It's 2 days hard travel to his cabin. Winter's coming on. If you get up there and can't handle it, then she comes back down when the pass is clear in spring, Cole said. I'm not keeping her prisoner. This is just a chance. A different life to try on and see if it fits better than this one did. Elias wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that he could fix this, that he could make things right, that his daughter didn't need to go live with a strange mountain man to find safety. But looking at Mara's bruised arms and hopeful eyes, he knew the truth. He'd already failed her. The best thing he could do now was let someone else try. When would you leave? He asked Cole. Tomorrow morning, before dawn. The weather's turning, and I want to be home before the real snow hits. That soon. The longer we wait, the harder the trip gets. Elias nodded slowly, feeling like he was signing away something precious. What will you need? Warm clothes, sturdy boots, whatever personal items she wants to bring. Cole's eyes moved to Mara. Pack light. We'll be hiking most of the way, and the trails are steep. I don't have much, Mara said softly. Then it should be easy. There was something that might have been gentleness in Cole's voice. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Hartwell, one more thing. Yes? You should know, up on the mountain, there's one absolute rule. No hitting. Ever. Doesn't matter if she breaks every dish I own or burns dinner or makes any other kind of mistake. Mistakes get corrected, not punished. She needs to hear you say you understand that. Elias met the mountain man's gaze. I understand, and I agree. Cole nodded once, sharp and satisfied. I'll be back at first light. Have her ready. He left then, disappearing into the cold November night. Father and daughter stood in the emptied parlor, the silence between them heavy with all the words they should have said years ago. Papa, Mara whispered. I'm sorry. You're sorry? Elias's voice broke. Mara, you have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who... He couldn't finish, couldn't articulate the depth of his failure. Mara crossed the room and wrapped her thin arms around him, and Elias held his daughter while she cried. He felt her ribs through her dress, felt how small she'd become, and hated himself with a violence that made his chest ache. I'll do better, he promised into her hair. I'll come visit. When the pass is clear in spring, I'll come up and check on you. And if you hate it, if you want to come home, I'll bring you back myself. What if I like it? Mara asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Then I'll be happy you found somewhere you fit. They stood like that for a long time, until the fire burned low and the cold crept in. Then Elias helped his daughter pack the few belongings she wanted to keep. Her mother's shawl, a small stack of letters, the clothes that might serve her in the mountains. It all fit in a single canvas pack. That night, Mara slept in her attic room one last time. Elias stayed awake in the parlor, feeding wood to the fire and thinking about all the ways a man could fail the people he loved. Thinking about mountain cabins and gray-eyed strangers and daughters who learned to hide bruises. Thinking about whether letting her go was the bravest thing he'd ever done or the most cowardly. When the sky started to lighten, he woke Mara. She came down the stairs with her pack and her mother's shawl wrapped around her shoulders, looking younger than 16 and older than she should. Cole Wilder arrived as promised, appearing out of the pre-dawn darkness like something conjured from the mountains themselves. He took Mara's pack without a word, testing its weight, then nodded approval. "Ready?" he asked her. Mara looked back at her father. Elias pulled her into one more embrace, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "Be safe," he whispered. "Be strong." "I'll try." "And Mara, don't ever think you have to earn kindness. You deserve it just for being you." She nodded against his chest, and then she pulled away. Cole was already moving down the street, his long stride eating up the distance. Mara had to hurry to catch up, her smaller steps quick and determined. Elias stood in the doorway and watched them go, the mountain man and the broken girl, until they disappeared into the gray morning light. Then he went back inside the empty house and wondered how long it would be before he stopped hearing the echo of Vivian's sweet voice in every room. Wondered if his daughter would ever forgive him. Wondered if he'd ever forgive himself. The trail out of Coleridge started easy enough, a wagon road that wound through scattered pines and frost-covered meadows. Mara walked behind Cole, watching his broad back move with steady, economical grace. He didn't talk, didn't look back to check if she was keeping up, just maintained that long, ground-eating stride that forced her to work to match it. By the time the sun was fully up, her legs were burning and her breath came in visible puffs. The wagon road had narrowed to a pack trail, and the elevation was climbing. Cole finally paused at a switchback where a fallen log offered a natural seat. "Rest," he said, shrugging off his own pack. "Drink water." Mara collapsed onto the log gratefully, her hands shaking as she uncorked the canteen he'd given her that morning. The water was ice-cold and tasted faintly of metal. She drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Cole was watching the trail behind them, his gray eyes scanning the landscape with an attention that seemed both relaxed and absolutely focused. After a moment, he pulled out a strip of dried meat and tossed it to her. "Eat. We've got another 4 hours before we stop for the night." Mara caught the meat awkwardly. It was tough and salty, nothing like the meals Vivian had prepared, but her stomach was empty enough that she didn't care. She chewed slowly, studying the man who'd taken her away from everything she knew. "Why did you really do it?" she asked quietly. Cole turned those pale eyes on her. "Do what?" "Come for me. You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." He was silent for a long moment, and Mara thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then he looked back at the trail and spoke in that rough, careful way of his. "I had a sister once, younger than me by 3 years. Our ma died when we were kids, and our pa remarried quick. New wife was pretty, said all the right things." He paused, his jaw working. "But when pa was out working the trap lines, she was someone else. Someone mean." Mara felt her chest tighten. "What happened?" "I didn't know, not for a long time. My sister was good at hiding it, same way you are. Made excuses for the bruises, said she was clumsy, accident-prone." Cole's hands curled into fists, then deliberately relaxed. "By the time I figured it out, the damage was done. She didn't believe she deserved anything better. Married the first man who asked just to get away from that house, and he turned out to be worse than our stepmother ever was." "Where is she now?" "Dead. 10 years now." The words were flat, emotionless, but Mara heard the weight underneath them. "Fell down the stairs," they said, "or he pushed her. Doesn't matter which, she was just as dead either way." Mara stared at him, understanding clicking into place. "So when you heard Vivian yesterday, I heard my sister, heard all the things that were said to her that made her think she wasn't worth saving." Cole looked at her directly. "I can't fix what happened to her, but I could do something about what was happening to you." The morning air felt suddenly colder. Mara pulled her mother's shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I'm sorry about your sister." "Me too." Cole stood, shouldering his pack in one smooth motion. "Ready to keep moving?" Mara's legs protested as she stood, but she nodded. Cole set off again, and she fell into step behind him, her mind churning with this new information. He wasn't rescuing her out of kindness or charity. He was trying to save the sister he'd lost. She didn't know if that made her feel better or worse. The trail grew steeper as the day wore on. They climbed through stands of aspen and pine, the air growing thinner and colder with each mile. Mara's pack seemed to gain weight with every step, the straps cutting into her shoulders. Her boots, sturdy enough for town, rubbed blisters on her heels. But she didn't complain. Cole had given her a chance, and she'd be damned if she'd prove Vivian right by failing at the first challenge. When the sun was high overhead, they stopped beside a small creek for a brief meal. Cole showed her how to filter water through a piece of cloth, how to recognize which plants were safe and which would make you sick. He spoke in short, clear sentences, demonstrating once, and then expecting her to replicate the action. "You'll need to know this, he said as she practiced with the water. "Up on the mountain, there's no one to do things for you. You learn, or you suffer the consequences." "What if I can't learn?" The question slipped out before Mara could stop it. Cole looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "Why wouldn't you be able to learn?" "Vivian said—" Mara stopped, hating how her stepmother's voice still echoed in her head. "She said I was slow, that I couldn't retain information, that I'd forget everything as soon as she taught me." "And you believed her?" "I tried so hard," Mara said, her voice breaking slightly. "But I kept making mistakes, kept breaking things, kept—" "Making mistakes isn't the same as being unable to learn," Cole interrupted. "It just means you're learning. Every person who's good at something was bad at it first." He paused, considering. "Did she hit you when you made mistakes?" Mara nodded mutely. "Then you weren't learning. You were trying not to get hit. That's different. Fear makes people clumsy, makes them forget things, makes them stumble over tasks they could do fine otherwise." He stood, brushing snow from his buckskins. "Up here, you can make all the mistakes you need to. Only way you learn is by doing things wrong first." The words settled into Mara's chest like warm stones. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe she wasn't the hopeless failure Vivian had painted her as. But 3 years of constant criticism had worn grooves in her mind that wouldn't smooth out in a single afternoon. They walked until the light started to fade, and Cole finally stopped in a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock. While Mara stood uncertainly, he moved with quick efficiency, gathering deadwood, clearing a space for fire, unpacking supplies. "Don't just stand there," he said without looking up. "Gather kindling, small stuff that'll catch easy. Look for dry twigs under the trees where the snow hasn't reached." Mara hurried to comply, grateful for something concrete to do. She searched beneath the pines, collecting handfuls of brittle twigs and dry needles. When she brought them back, Cole showed her how to arrange them for maximum airflow, how to strike flint and steel to catch a spark. It took her 7 tries before she got a flame. By the 8th, she was ready to cry with frustration. But Cole just waited, patient as stone, until finally a spark caught and tiny flames began to lick at the tinder. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Now feed it. Slow. Don't smother it." Mara added twigs with shaking hands, watching the fire grow from fragile flickers to steady warmth. When it was burning well, Cole set a pot of water to boil and began preparing their meal. More dried meat, some kind of grain that expanded in the hot water, a handful of wild onions he'd collected along the trail. They ate in silence as darkness fell completely. The fire created a small circle of warmth and light, beyond which the mountain night pressed close. Mara could hear wind in the pines, the distant call of something that might have been an owl. The stars overhead were brighter than she'd ever seen them in town, scattered across the sky like salt spilled on dark cloth. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Cole glanced up, following her gaze. "It is, but beauty up here can kill you if you're not careful. Cold this pretty will freeze you dead if you don't respect it." "Is that what everything is like on the mountain? Beautiful and dangerous?" "Mostly." Cole poured himself coffee from the pot, the smell sharp and bitter in the cold air. "But honest, mountain doesn't lie to you or pretend to be something it's not. If it's going to hurt you, you'll see it coming." Unlike people, Mara thought. Unlike stepmothers with honey voices and hard hands. She wrapped herself in her blanket near the fire, feeling exhaustion pull at her bones. Her feet ached, her shoulders burned, and tomorrow promised more of the same. But underneath the physical discomfort was something unexpected, a strange, fragile feeling that it took her a long time to identify. Relief. She was away from Vivian's house, away from the constant criticism, the casual violence, the suffocating sense that she could never be good enough. Up here, there was only the mountain and the man who'd pulled her out of that life. And so far, he'd been exactly what he promised. Direct, honest, expecting her to learn, but not punishing her for not knowing. "Cole?" she said into the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you for coming back that second day, for making Papa listen." There was a long pause, then, "Your pa didn't need much convincing once he saw the truth. Shame it took a stranger to show it to him." "He's gone a lot," Mara said quietly. "The freight business keeps him on the road. I think Vivian counted on that." "Probably." Cole fed another piece of wood to the fire. "You should sleep. Tomorrow's harder than today was." Mara closed her eyes, but sleep was slow coming. Her mind kept circling back to that confrontation in the parlor. Her father's face when he saw her bruises, Vivian's mask finally cracking, Cole's steady presence like a rock in a river of chaos. She'd been so afraid that Papa wouldn't believe her, that Vivian would talk her way out of it the way she always did. But Cole had seen. Cole had heard. And somehow that had made all the difference. The second day of travel was indeed harder. The trail grew steeper, narrower, winding through terrain that made Mara's heart pound with fear. In places there was barely enough room to walk single file, with sheer drops falling away on one side. Cole navigated it all with calm confidence, occasionally pointing out where to step, where to grab for balance. "Don't look down," he said when they crossed a particularly narrow section. "Eyes on the trail ahead. Focus on what's right in front of you." Mara kept her gaze locked on Cole's back and tried not to think about the empty air beside her. One step, then another, until suddenly they were across and onto wider ground, and she could breathe again. "Good," Cole said simply, and continued walking. They stopped less frequently this second day, and when they did rest, Cole began teaching her other things. How to read animal tracks in the snow. How to tell which way was north by the moss on the trees and the angle of the sun. How to move quietly through the forest instead of crashing through underbrush like a panicked deer. "Everything's a skill," he told her when she stumbled over a root and fell hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. "Walking, watching, listening. You're not bad at it, you just haven't learned it yet." Mara picked herself up, brushing dirt and pine needles from her dress. The fall had torn a small hole in the hem, and she stared at it with a familiar spike of anxiety. Vivian would have, but Vivian wasn't here. Vivian would never be here again. "It's just cloth," Cole said, watching her face. "Can be mended tonight by the fire. Tears happen in the mountains. It's not a tragedy, just a thing that needs fixing." The simple practicality of it made something loosen in Mara's chest. She nodded and kept walking. By late afternoon, they rounded a final switchback, and Cole stopped. "There," he said, pointing. Mara looked where he indicated and saw it. A cabin nestled against the mountainside, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin gray line. It was small but solid-looking, built from logs that had weathered to silver gray. A lean-to sheltered a stack of firewood. A small corral held a single horse that raised its head at their approach. "Home," Cole said, and there was satisfaction in the word. As they descended the final stretch of trail, Mara felt a mixture of emotions she couldn't untangle. This was it. This was where she'd be living, at least through the winter. This tiny cabin in the high country, miles from anyone or anything she'd known. The door was barred from outside. Cole had been gone 2 days, after all. He lifted the heavy beam and pushed inside, and Mara followed into warmth and the smell of dried herbs and leather. The interior was larger than she'd expected, one main room with a sleeping loft above. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Shelves held supplies and equipment. Furs and hides hung from the rafters. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth. Everything was scrupulously clean and organized with military precision. "Loft's yours," Cole said, dropping their packs. "I'll take the floor down here. There's blankets in the chest by the ladder, extra furs if you need them. Gets cold at night, even with the fire going. Mara climbed the ladder to the loft and found a space just large enough for a narrow bed and a small trunk. A tiny window looked out toward the peaks. The mattress was stuffed with something that rustled, pine needles maybe, or dried grass, and topped with a patchwork quilt that had been mended so many times the original pattern was barely visible. It was nothing like her attic room in Coleridge. It was smaller, rougher, more primitive. It felt safer than anywhere she'd been in 3 years. She came back down to find Cole already reviving the banked fire, adding wood until flames leapt and crackled. He set water to boil and began unpacking their supplies, moving through the space with the easy familiarity of long practice. "There's things we need to establish," he said without preamble. "Rules for how this works." Mara's stomach clenched. Rules, requirements, ways to fail. Cole seemed to sense her tension. "Nothing complicated. First rule, no hitting, like I told your father. You make a mistake, we fix it. You break something, we repair it or do without. But there's no punishment for accidents or for learning." Mara nodded carefully. "Second, you pull your weight. I'm not looking for a servant, but I am looking for a partner in keeping this place running. I'll teach you what you need to know, and you do the work. Fair trade." "I understand." Third, honesty. If something's wrong, you say so. If you're hurt or sick or scared, you tell me. If you don't know how to do something, you ask. I can't help with problems I don't know about. This was harder. Mara had learned to hide problems, to pretend everything was fine even when it wasn't, but she forced herself to nod again. And last, this is your home now, at least through the winter. That means you get a say in how things work. You see a better way to do something, you speak up. You need something changed, you ask. I'm not a tyrant, Mara. I'm just a man trying to live and let you do the same. He held out his hand, rough and scarred from years of hard living. That sound fair to you? Mara looked at his hand, at his face, at the cabin that smelled like smoke and safety. Then she reached out and shook, her small hand disappearing into his calloused grip. Fair, she whispered. Good. Cole released her hand and turned back to the fire. Now let's get some food in you, and then I'll show you how the place works. Tomorrow we start teaching you mountain living for real. That night, Mara lay in the loft listening to the wind howl around the cabin's corners and the fire pop and settle below. Cole was down there somewhere, wrapped in his bedroll, a dark shape in the firelight. She could hear his breathing, slow and even, the breathing of someone who slept without fear. She thought about her father alone in Coleridge, dealing with the aftermath of Vivian's departure. Thought about what the town would say when they realized Elias Hartwell had sent his only daughter to live with the mountain man. Thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways she could fail at this new life the way she'd failed at the old one. But underneath the anxiety was that same strange relief she'd felt the night before. She was here. She was safe. And tomorrow, Cole would teach her things that didn't require her to be someone she wasn't. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere in the darkness, and the mountain answered with silence and stars and the promise of snow. Mara pulled the quilt closer and finally slept without flinching at shadows. Morning came early on the mountain, announced by gray light filtering through the loft window and the sound of Cole moving below. Mara woke disoriented, her body aching from 2 days of hard travel and a night on an unfamiliar mattress. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and panic fluttered in her chest. Then memory returned. The cabin, the mountain, Cole Wilder's gruff promise of safety. She sat up slowly, her muscles protesting, and climbed down the ladder to find Cole already dressed and stoking the fire. "Coffee's ready," he said without looking up. "Drink it, then get dressed for work. We've got a full day ahead." The coffee was bitter and strong, nothing like the delicate tea Vivian had preferred. Mara drank it anyway, feeling the heat spread through her chest and chase away the morning chill. Cole handed her a plate of fried cornmeal and venison, and she ate standing by the fire, watching him move through his morning routine with efficient purpose. "First thing you need to learn is the basics," Cole said when she'd finished eating. "Water, fire, food. Everything else builds on those three. You master those, you can survive just about anything the mountain throws at you." He led her outside into air so cold it burned her lungs. The sun was just touching the peaks, painting them gold in rows. Snow from the previous night dusted everything with white powder that crunched under their boots. Cole showed her the spring first, a clear, cold stream that bubbled up from between rocks about 50 yards from the cabin. This is where we get drinking water. Never let it run low. Every morning and every evening you fill the buckets and bring them inside. Winter comes hard up here, and this stream can freeze over. We need reserves. Mara carried bucket after bucket until her arms screamed and her hands were numb with cold. Cole watched her struggle, made her find her own rhythm, her own way of balancing the weight. When she spilled half a bucket on the icy ground, he simply said, "Try again." No anger, no criticism, just the expectation that she'd figure it out. By the time the water barrels inside were full, the sun was fully up and Mara's shoulders felt like they were on fire. But she'd done it. She'd completed the task without breaking down or giving up. "Good," Cole said, and the single word of approval made something warm bloom in her chest. Now the wood? The woodpile was enormous, cords of split logs stacked under the lean-to in neat rows. Cole explained how much they'd need to get through winter, how to recognize dry wood versus green, how to stack it so air could circulate and keep it from rotting. "You'll split some every day," he said, demonstrating with an axe that looked too heavy for Mara to even lift. "Not all at once. Steady work, little by little. Your arms will get stronger." He made her try, and the first time Mara swung the axe, she nearly dropped it. The second time, she missed the log entirely and buried the blade in the chopping block. Cole didn't laugh or sigh with exasperation. He just adjusted her grip, showed her how to let the weight of the axe do most of the work, and stepped back. Again, Mara swung. The axe bounced off the log without splitting it. Again, another swing. A small crack appeared in the wood. Again. By the 20th attempt, Mara's arms were shaking and sweat was freezing on her face despite the cold. But she'd split 3 logs into pieces small enough for the stove, and she'd done it herself. Cole added them to the indoor wood box without comment, then moved on to the next lesson. The days fell into a pattern after that, brutal, exhausting, but strangely satisfying. Cole taught her to read the weather by watching the sky and the way animals behaved, taught her to preserve meat by smoking and salting, to tan hides using a mixture that smelled terrible but produced supple leather, taught her to sew with sinew and bone needles, mending tears in clothing and making repairs to equipment. Every task had a purpose, every skill built on the last. And when Mara made mistakes, which she did constantly, Cole treated them as exactly what he'd promised, things to be corrected, not punished. The first time she burned dinner, she'd frozen in terror, waiting for the blow that had always followed such failures in Vivian's kitchen. Instead, Cole had scraped the worst of the char from the pot, added water and salt, and made it edible through sheer stubbornness. "Next time, lower heat," he'd said while they ate the salvaged meal. "Venison cooks fast. You don't need much flame." "I'm sorry," Mara had whispered, still waiting for anger that never came. Cole had looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "Why?" "You were trying something new. Takes practice to get it right." "I've burned plenty of dinners in my time." "But I wasted food." "We ate it, didn't we?" "Wasn't wasted." He'd gestured with his spoon. "Stop apologizing for learning, Mara. That's what you're here to do." Those words became a sort of anchor for her. Stop apologizing for learning. It went against every instinct Vivian had drilled into her, every fearful habit she'd developed. But slowly, painfully, Mara began to internalize it. When she forgot to bank the fire properly, and it went out overnight, requiring them to restart it from scratch, Cole showed her the correct technique without a single harsh word. When she spooked the horse while trying to feed it and ended up flat on her back in the snow, Cole helped her up and taught her how to approach animals calmly, from the side instead of head-on. "Everything up here is about respect," he told her, as the horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, finally accepted an apple from her trembling hand. "You respect the mountain, the weather, the animals, yourself. Respect doesn't mean fear. It means understanding what something is and working with it instead of against it." The concept was foreign to Mara, who'd spent 3 years trying to contort herself into shapes that pleased Vivian, working with instead of against, being something instead of trying to become something else. 3 weeks into her mountain life, the first real snow came. Mara woke to find the world transformed, everything buried under 2 feet of white powder that was still falling in thick, heavy flakes. Cole took one look outside and nodded with satisfaction. Good. We're well stocked, and this'll keep us inside for a few days. Time to work on indoor skills. He taught her to make candles from rendered fat, to repair snowshoes with rawhide strips, to weave baskets from willow branches he'd harvested in the fall. They worked by firelight, while wind howled around the cabin and snow piled higher against the walls. During those long, quiet hours, Cole talked more than he ever had before. He told her about his years as a scout for the army, about the territories he'd seen and the people he'd known. Told her about his sister, Sarah, her name had been, and the bright, laughing girl she'd been before their stepmother's cruelty had dimmed that light. She used to sing, Cole said, his hands busy braiding leather cord. Had a voice like water over stones. After a while she stopped, just got quieter and quieter until she was barely there anymore. Like she was disappearing, Mara said softly, understanding. Yeah. Cole's jaw tightened. By the time I realized what was happening, she didn't believe me when I said it wasn't her fault. Thought she deserved it somehow. Married that bastard thinking at least he wanted her, even if he was mean. You couldn't have known, Mara said. You were just a kid yourself. Old enough to have eyes, old enough to have asked questions. He looked at her directly. That's why I made you that promise. No hitting, ever. Because once you start thinking you deserve it, it's hard to believe anything else. Mara's throat tightened. Vivian used to say I was ungrateful, that she was trying to make me better, and I was too stupid to learn. Vivian was a liar. Cole's voice was flat, certain. You're not stupid, Mara. You're scared. There's a difference. Scared people make mistakes because they're trying too hard not to. Once you stop being afraid, you'll be surprised what you can do. The snow stopped after 3 days, leaving the world hushed and pristine. Cole strapped on snowshoes and took Mara out to check the trap line he'd set before coming to town. He showed her how to read the traps, how to reset them, how to dispatch animals quickly and humanely when they'd been caught. It was hard, brutal work, and Mara's stomach turned the first time she watched Cole kill a trapped rabbit. But he was matter-of-fact about it, explaining that this was how they survived, that wasting the animal's death by being squeamish was more disrespectful than the killing itself. Everything dies, he said as they skinned the rabbit together, his hands guiding hers through the process. Question is whether it dies for something or for nothing. We use every part, meat, fur, sinew, bones. Sinew? That rabbit's death feeds us, clothes us, helps us make it through winter. That's not cruel. That's the mountain's way. Mara learned to stomach it, learned to work with cold efficiency that didn't waste motion or meat, learned to be grateful for what the mountain provided while respecting what had been given up to provide it. Christmas came and went unmarked except for Cole roasting a grouse and allowing them an extra measure of the precious coffee stores. Mara thought about her father in Coleridge, wondered if he was alone or if he'd found some way to celebrate. Wondered if he thought about her up on the mountain, learning to split wood and tan hides and survive. January brought temperatures so cold that water froze in the bucket between the spring and the cabin. Mara's hands cracked and bled despite the salve Cole made from bear grease and herbs. Her body was leaner now, muscle replacing softness, her movements more confident and sure. She could split wood for an hour without stopping, could skin a rabbit in under 5 minutes, could read the sky and know when snow was coming a full day before it arrived, could start a fire with 3 strikes of the flint instead of 20. The scared, clumsy girl who'd left Coleridge was becoming something else, something harder and more capable, something that knew how to work with the mountain instead of fighting against it. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire working on separate projects, Mara mending a tear in Cole's spare shirt, Cole carving a new handle for a skinning knife, she finally asked the question that had been building in her mind for weeks. What happens in spring? Cole looked up from his carving. What do you mean? You said I could leave when the pass is clear, that I wasn't a prisoner. Mara kept her eyes on her stitching. Did you mean it? I don't say things I don't mean, so if I wanted to go back to Coleridge, I'd take you down myself soon as the trails are passable. Cole set down his knife. Is that what you want? Mara thought about it carefully. Thought about her father's house, about the town where everyone knew everyone's business, about the possibility of running into Vivian on the street, or hearing people whisper about the girl who'd been sent away to live with the mountain man. "I don't know," she admitted. "I miss Papa, but I don't miss the rest of it. Don't miss feeling like I'm constantly failing at being what I'm supposed to be." "You're not failing at anything up here." "I know." Mara tied off her thread and bit it clean. "That's what scares me. What if I go back down and turn into that scared, clumsy girl again?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd heard it. "You were never that girl, Mara. You were a girl being hurt who learned to make herself small to survive it. That's not the same as being weak or stupid or any of the other things you were told you were." "Then who am I?" "That's for you to figure out." Cole picked up his carving again. "But I'll tell you what I see. I see someone who walked 2 days into country she'd never seen without complaint. Someone who picks herself up when she falls and tries again. Someone who's gotten stronger every single day she's been here, not just in body but in spirit." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "You really think that?" "I don't say things I don't mean," Cole repeated. "You're doing fine, Mara. Better than fine. You're doing the work, and it's changing you. That's all anyone can ask." The conversation stayed with Mara through the rest of the winter. She thought about it while hauling water, while splitting wood, while working the traps in the bitter cold. Who was she really? Not the failure Vivian had painted her as, not the helpless child her father had tried to protect, but not quite the mountain woman Cole was training her to be either. Someone in between, maybe. Someone still figuring out where she fit. February brought a thaw that turned the snow to slush and made travel treacherous. Cole used the time to teach Mara more complex skills: how to preserve food in clay pots sealed with beeswax, how to make rope from plant fibers, how to repair snowshoes and mend leather with proper stitching that wouldn't tear out under strain. And then, on a gray afternoon with sleet turning to rain, they heard it, the distant sound of someone calling out, echoing off the mountain slopes. Cole was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the rifle he kept by the door. "Stay inside." But Mara had already recognized the voice. "It's Papa." She pushed past Cole and out into the rain, her heart hammering. Down the trail, stumbling through the slush in clothes too light for mountain weather, came Elias Hartwell. He looked thinner than Mara remembered, his face haggard and worn. "Mara!" He saw her and broke into a run, slipping and nearly falling in his haste. Mara ran to meet him, and then she was in her father's arms, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Elias held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his rough hands smoothing her hair over and over like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I had to see you," he gasped out. "Had to know you were all right. The winter's been so hard, and I kept thinking, 'I'm fine, Papa.'" Mara pulled back enough to look at his face. "I'm more than fine. I'm good." Elias studied her, taking in the changes. She was leaner, yes, but there was color in her cheeks and a steadiness to her gaze that hadn't been there before. Her hands were rough with calluses, and she stood differently, straighter, more grounded. "You look different," he said wonderingly. "I am different." Mara glanced back at Cole, who stood in the cabin doorway watching them with his usual unreadable expression. "Come inside. You're soaked through." They went into the warmth of the cabin, and Cole closed the door against the weather. Elias looked around, taking in the neat organization, the racks of drying meat and herbs, the carefully maintained equipment. "Mr. Wilder," he said formally, "thank you for taking care of my daughter." "She takes care of herself mostly," Cole replied, hanging Elias's wet coat near the fire. "I just showed her how." Over hot coffee and a meal, Mara prepared herself: venison stew with wild onions and herbs, bread she'd learned to bake in the Dutch oven. Elias told them about Coleridge. Vivian had left town entirely, gone back east to family in Philadelphia. The scandal had been enormous at first, whispers and speculation about what had driven such a refined lady to abandon her marriage. "I told anyone who asked the truth," Elias said quietly, "that she'd been hurting you and I'd put her out for it. Some people believed me. Others thought I was making excuses for sending you away." "Let them think what they want," Mara said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. "Their opinions don't change what happened." Elias looked at his daughter with something like wonder. "You've changed, Mara. Really changed." The mountain does that, Cole said. Strips away what doesn't work and shows you what does. They talked long into the night, Elias sharing news from town, Mara describing her days on the mountain, Cole adding occasional comments in his spare way. When exhaustion finally claimed Elias, Mara gave up her loft and made a bed for herself by the fire while her father slept above. In the darkness, with rain drumming on the roof and her father's familiar snoring drifting down from the loft, Mara felt something settle in her chest. Elias had come all this way in dangerous weather just to make sure she was safe. He'd defended her to the town, had chosen her over Vivian's reputation and his own comfort. He'd failed her before, yes, but he was trying now, and that had to count for something. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the rain frozen into a glaze of ice that made everything sparkle. Elias stayed for 2 more days, and Mara watched him watch her, saw him notice how she moved through the cabin with confidence, how she handled the axe and the water buckets, how she spoke to Cole with easy familiarity instead of fear. On the morning he was set to leave, Elias pulled Mara aside while Cole was outside tending to Copper. "Come home," he said quietly. "Please, Mara. I know I failed you before, but I'm different now. The house is different. It's just me. And I swear on your mother's grave I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Mara felt her chest tighten. Part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to go back to her father and try to rebuild what they'd lost. But another part, the part that had learned to split wood and read weather and trust her own strength, hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said honestly. "The town, the memories, everything that happened." "Then don't decide now," Elias said. "Just promise me you'll think about it. That when spring really comes and the passes are clear, you'll at least consider coming home." "What if home isn't there anymore?" Mara asked. "What if home is here now?" Elias looked around the small cabin, at the mountain peaks visible through the window, at the life his daughter had built in this harsh, beautiful place. Then he looked back at her, and his eyes were wet. "Then I guess I'll have to learn to climb," he said. "Because wherever you are, that's where I want to be, even if it's just for visits." Mara hugged him tightly. "I'll think about it, Papa. I promise." She watched him leave, Cole accompanying him down the first part of the trail to make sure he made it to safer ground. When Cole returned hours later, stamping snow from his boots, Mara was standing at the window staring out at the endless white peaks. "He wants me to come back," she said without turning around. "I know. What do you think I should do?" Cole was quiet for so long that Mara finally turned to look at him. He was studying her with that intense gray gaze, and she saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Something that might have been fear. "Think," he said carefully, "that you should do what's right for you, not what makes me happy, or your father happy, or anyone else. What do you want, Mara?" And that was the question, wasn't it? What did she want? Not what she should want, not what would make others happy, but what her own heart was telling her to choose. She looked around the cabin, at the loft where she slept, at the hearth where she'd learned to cook, at the tools she'd mastered and the life she'd built with her own bleeding hands. Looked at Cole, who'd given her safety and skills and the space to become someone new. Then she looked out the window again at the mountain that had broken her down and built her back up stronger. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I will. Before the pass is clear, I'll know." Cole nodded slowly. "Fair enough." And they went back to the work of surviving winter, both of them carefully not talking about the choice that was coming. The choice that would determine not just where Mara lived, but who she would become. March came in like a wolf, all teeth and fury, dumping snow that erased the trails and kept them cabin-bound for days at a time. But underneath the violence, Mara could feel something shifting. The sun stayed in the sky a little longer each day. The icicles hanging from the eaves began to drip at midday. The mountain was loosening its grip, preparing to let winter go. And with each passing day, the question her father had asked grew heavier in Mara's mind. What did she want? Where did she belong? She thought about it while grinding corn, while mending clothes, while lying awake in the loft listening to wind rattle the shutters. The girl who'd left Coleridge had been so certain she didn't belong there, so desperate to escape Vivian's cruelty that anywhere else seemed better. But what about the person she'd become on the mountain? Where did that Mara belong? Cole never pushed her for an answer, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was tension in the set of his shoulders, a carefulness to the way he spoke, like he was bracing himself for loss. One evening in late March, with the fire burning low and both of them working on separate tasks in comfortable silence, Mara finally broke. "I'm afraid," she said into the quiet. Cole looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Of what?" "Of going back and becoming who I was before. Of staying and—" She stopped, trying to find words for the tangle of fears in her chest. "Of making the wrong choice." Cole set down the knife and whetstone. "There's no wrong choice, Mara, just different paths. Both of them have good and bad waiting down the line. How do I know which one I'm supposed to take?" "You don't." Cole's gray eyes were steady on hers. "That's what makes it a choice instead of an obligation. You pick the path that feels right in your gut and then you walk it the best you can." "What does your gut say?" Mara asked. "About what I should do?" Cole was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "My gut says selfish things. Says I don't want you to leave because I've gotten used to having you here. Used to having someone to talk to who isn't a horse or my own thoughts." He paused, looking down at his scarred hands. "But what I want doesn't matter. This is your life, Mara. Your choice." Something in Mara's chest cracked open. "It's not selfish to want people to stay, isn't it? When I know your father's down there missing you, wanting you back? When I know you've got a whole life waiting in Coleridge that doesn't involve splitting wood in the freezing cold and eating venison 7 days a week?" Cole's voice was carefully controlled, but Mara heard the emotion underneath. "I brought you up here to save you, not to keep you. There's a difference." "What if I want to be kept?" The words came out before Mara could stop them. "What if I like splitting wood and eating venison and learning things that matter instead of how to pour tea and curtsy properly?" "Then you stay." Cole met her eyes. "But you make sure you're staying because you want this life, not because you're still running from the old one. Fear's a bad reason to make a permanent choice." Mara thought about that for a long time after they'd both gone to bed. Was she running from Coleridge or running towards something else? Was she staying on the mountain because she loved it or because she was afraid to face the town and the memories? The answer came to her gradually over the next few weeks as the snow continued its slow retreat and the first green shoots began to push through the mud. She watched Cole work with his usual quiet competence. Noticed the way he moved through his days with purpose and peace. Noticed how she'd started to move the same way, confident in her skills, comfortable in her body, no longer flinching at sudden movements or apologizing for taking up space. This wasn't fear. This was belonging. April arrived with rain that washed away the last of the snow and turned the trails to rivers of mud. Elias sent word through a trapper passing through the high country that he'd be coming up as soon as the roads were passable, wanting to know Mara's decision. The morning her father was expected, Mara woke early and climbed down from the loft to find Cole already awake, staring into the fire with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. Cole shrugged. "Thinking." "About what?" "About whether I did the right thing, bringing you up here. Whether I saved you or just stole you from the life you should have had." Mara crossed to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You gave me a choice. That's more than anyone else ever did." "Doesn't mean it was the right one." "Cole." Mara waited until he looked at her. "I need to tell you something before Papa gets here. Something I've been trying to figure out how to say." She saw fear flicker across his face, quickly hidden. "All right. I'm not going back to Coleridge. Not to live anyway." The silence that followed was absolute. Cole's expression didn't change, but Mara saw his hand tighten around the coffee cup until his knuckles went white. "You sure?" he asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm sure." Mara felt a weight lift from her chest as she said it out loud. "This is where I belong, Cole. Not because I'm running from Vivian or the memories, but because I found something here I didn't even know I was looking for." "What's that?" "Myself." Mara gestured around the cabin, at the life they'd built together. "The person I am here. Strong, capable, useful. That's who I really am. Not the scared, clumsy girl Vivian saw. Not even the daughter Papa remembers from before. I'm someone new, someone I actually like being. Cole set down his cup with shaking hands. Your father's not going to like this. I know, but he'll understand eventually. He already sees the change in me. Mara took a breath. I was thinking maybe there's a middle path. I could visit Coleridge sometimes, stay with Papa for a week or two when the weather's good. Let him see I'm happy and safe. But my home would be here. Here, Cole repeated, like he was testing the word. On the mountain. Here in this cabin, if you'll have me. As a partner in keeping the place running, like you said that first night. Mara felt heat creep up her neck. Unless you'd rather I found my own place somewhere. No. Cole's voice was rough. No, I don't want that. This is your home, Mara, for as long as you want it to be. The relief on his face was so naked that Mara felt her throat tighten. She reached out and took his scarred hand in hers, and Cole gripped it like a lifeline. Thank you, she said softly, for hearing me that day, for coming back, for giving me the chance to find out who I could be. Thank you for taking it, Cole replied, for being brave enough to walk away from everything you knew. They sat like that, hands clasped, until they heard the sound of someone approaching up the trail. Elias appeared moments later, looking better than he had in February, stronger, more rested, with hope in his eyes that dimmed when he saw Mara's expression. You're not coming back, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Papa. Mara stood to face him, still holding Cole's hand. I'm staying here. This is where I belong now. She watched her father's face crumple, watched him try to hide his disappointment and fail. But he didn't argue, didn't try to change her mind. He just pulled her into a fierce embrace and held on. I knew, he said into her hair. Soon as I saw you in February, I knew you'd found your place. Doesn't make it easier, but I knew. I'll visit, Mara promised, when the weather's good, and you can come up here whenever you want. You're always welcome. Elias pulled back, wiping his eyes roughly. Mountain life suits you. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. The words broke something open in Mara's chest. She'd spent so long thinking she was disappointing everyone that hearing her father's pride felt almost foreign. There's something else, Elias said, reaching into his pack. I brought you something. Was going to give it to you whether you came back or stayed. He pulled out a leather document folder, weathered and official looking. Inside were papers covered in legal script that Mara couldn't quite decipher. What is this? Land deed, Elias said simply. 20 acres adjacent to Cole's property here. It's in your name, Mara. Yours alone. Mara stared at the papers, not quite comprehending. Papa, I don't understand. It's security, Elias explained. Independence. Your mother had some money set aside, and I've been saving from the freight business. I used it to buy this land and put it in your name. He glanced at Cole. No disrespect meant, Wilder, but my daughter deserves to own her own future, not be dependent on anyone else's charity. Cole's expression was unreadable, but he nodded slowly. Agreed. She should have her own ground to stand on. But I don't know the first thing about owning land, Mara protested. You'll learn, Elias said. Same way you learned everything else up here. And when you're 18 in June, you'll have options. You can build on it, sell it, lease it, whatever you want. It's yours, Mara. A foundation to build the life you choose. Mara looked at the deed, at her name written in careful script beside the legal description of 20 mountain acres. It was more than property. It was freedom. The freedom to stay because she wanted to, not because she had nowhere else to go. The freedom to make her own choices without fear of losing the roof over her head. Thank you, Papa, she whispered. Thank you for understanding. Elias stayed for 3 days, and Mara showed him everything she'd learned. He watched her split wood with practiced efficiency, tan a hide she'd been working on for weeks, identify edible plants and track animals through the forest. He saw the easy partnership between her and Cole, the way they moved around each other in the small cabin without getting in each other's way, the quiet respect that had grown between them. On the morning he left, Elias pulled Cole aside while Mara was down at the spring. Take care of her, he said quietly. I know she can take care of herself now, but still, I will, Cole promised. And Elias? Thank you for trusting me with her, for not fighting this even though I know it hurts." Elias studied the mountain man for a long moment. "You gave me my daughter back, Wilder. Maybe not in the way I expected, but she's alive and strong and happy. That's more than I had any right to hope for after—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "After what I let happen to her." "You didn't know," Cole said. "I should have." Elias squared his shoulders. "But I'm learning too. Learning to pay attention, to ask questions, to not let fear of the answers keep me blind." They shook hands, two men who'd both failed in their own ways and were trying to do better. Then Elias hugged his daughter goodbye and headed down the trail toward Coleridge, looking back 3 times before the forest finally swallowed him. Mara stood watching long after he'd disappeared, Cole silent beside her. "You all right?" he asked finally. "Yeah." Mara turned to look at the cabin, at the mountain peaks rising beyond, at the land that was now legally hers. "I'm more than all right. I'm home." The months that followed fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Mara's 18th birthday came and went, marked by Cole presenting her with a rifle he'd traded for in town, lighter than his own, built for smaller hands, perfectly balanced for her frame. "Every person on the mountain needs to know how to shoot," he said gruffly. "For hunting and protection both." He taught her to use it, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his rough hands gentle as they corrected her grip. Mara proved to be a decent shot, patient and steady in a way that translated well to marksmanship. By summer's end, she could bring down a deer at 100 yards and hit a target the size of a man's fist at 50. Summer brought other changes too. Mara began exploring her 20 acres, walking the boundaries with Cole, and planning where she might build someday. There was a spot near a grove of aspen where the ground leveled out and a small creek provided water year-round. She could picture a cabin there, larger than Cole's, with space for the life she was building. But for now, she stayed where she was. The rhythm of their days had become precious to her, the easy silence of working side by side, the quiet conversations by the fire, the sense of being partners in survival. Cole had become more than her rescuer or teacher. He'd become her friend, the person who knew her better than anyone and accepted her completely. In August, a letter arrived via a passing trapper. It was from Elias, and the news made Mara's hands shake. Vivian had died in Philadelphia, her heart giving out suddenly in the middle of a society party. There would be no more fear of accidentally encountering her, no more nightmares about that honey-sweet voice turning cruel. Cole found Mara sitting on the porch that evening, the letter crumpled in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly, settling beside her. "What's wrong?" "She's dead. Vivian. Papa wrote to tell me." Cole was quiet, letting her cry. Finally he asked, "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know." Mara wiped her eyes. "I should feel something, shouldn't I? Relief or happiness or at least satisfaction that she can't hurt anyone else. But I just feel empty, like I used up all my anger and fear on her already, and there's nothing left." "That's all right," Cole said. "Sometimes the end of something bad isn't a big moment. It's just over, and you get to move on." "Is that what happened with your sister? When she died, did you feel relief?" "No." Cole's voice was heavy. "I felt like I'd failed her all over again. Felt like if I'd just been smarter or braver or paid better attention, she'd still be alive." He paused. "Took me years to understand that carrying that guilt wasn't honoring her memory. It was just another kind of prison." Mara leaned against his shoulder, and Cole's arm came around her carefully, like he was afraid she might pull away. But she didn't. She let herself be held, let herself feel the solid warmth of him, let herself acknowledge that somewhere along the way, this gruff mountain man had become the person she trusted most in the world. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving me, for teaching me, for everything." "You saved yourself," Cole replied. "I just opened the door." Fall came in a riot of gold and crimson, painting the mountainside in colors so vivid they seemed unreal. Mara and Cole worked from dawn to dusk preparing for winter, harvesting the last of the garden, hunting and smoking meat, gathering herbs and roots, checking and repairing equipment. On a crisp October morning, Elias arrived with unexpected news. He'd sold the house in Coleridge and the freight business. He was moving to a smaller town closer to the mountains, a place called Cedar Falls that sat at the base of the range. "Closer to you," he explained to Mara, "so I can visit more often without risking my neck on those high passes. And there's good business there, smaller scale, but steady. I'm getting too old for those long hauls anyway." Mara hugged her father tightly. The guilt that had lived in his eyes for so long had finally begun to fade, replaced by something that looked like peace. He'd let go of the house where Vivian had hurt his daughter, let go of the life he'd built around trying to provide for a wife who hadn't deserved his devotion. He was starting over, just like Mara had. "I'm proud of you, Papa," she told him, "for making changes, for choosing yourself." "Learn from the best," Elias said, smiling at her. He stayed for a week that time, and Mara noticed the way Cole relaxed around him, the way the two men fell into easy conversation about weather and hunting and the peculiarities of mountain living. They weren't friends exactly, but there was mutual respect there, and something like understanding. The night before Elias left, the three of them sat around the fire while wind howled outside, and the first snow of the season fell in thick, heavy flakes. "You're happy," Elias said to Mara. It wasn't a question. "I am," she confirmed, "happier than I ever thought I could be." "And you," Elias turned to Cole, "you're taking good care of her?" "She takes care of herself mostly," Cole said, echoing what he'd told Elias that first visit. "I just try to keep up." Elias laughed, a sound Mara hadn't heard from him in years. "That sounds about right. She was always stubborn, even as a little girl. Got that from her mother." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and memories, building bridges between Mara's past and present. When Elias finally headed for the sleeping loft, he paused at the ladder. "Cole," he said quietly, "I know you brought her up here to save her, but I think maybe she saved you too." Cole didn't answer, but after Elias had climbed up and his snoring began to drift down, he looked at Mara with an expression she'd never seen before, something soft and wondering and almost afraid. "You might be right," Cole said roughly. "Before you came, this place was just somewhere to survive. Now it's home," Mara finished. "Yeah." Cole's gray eyes held hers. "Home." Winter settled in again, but this year it felt different. Mara moved through the cold months with confidence born of experience, knowing what to expect and how to handle it. She and Cole worked together like a well-oiled machine, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other through the hard days when the cold seemed endless and the cabin walls felt too close. On the longest night of the year, with wind screaming around the cabin and snow piling high against the walls, Cole pulled out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. "To surviving," he said, pouring them each a measure. "To more than surviving," Mara countered, raising her cup. "To living." They drank, the whiskey burning warm down her throat. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the mountain night was fierce and beautiful and utterly unforgiving. "I've been thinking," Cole said after a while, "about your land, about the cabin you want to build there. What about it? I could help. We could design it together, start gathering materials come spring, maybe have it ready by next winter." Mara looked at him curiously. "You want me to move out?" "No." Cole's voice was firm. "But I want you to have the option. Want you to know you can stay here or build your own place or do whatever the hell you want, and either way, you'll always have a home." "What if I want to stay here?" Mara asked softly. "What if I don't want my own cabin, at least not yet?" Cole met her eyes, and for once his expression was completely open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "Then you stay, for as long as you want, forever, if that's what you choose." "Forever sounds good," Mara said. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They weren't just partners in survival anymore. They were family. The kind you choose rather than the kind you're born into. And maybe, someday, they could be even more than that. But for now, this was enough. Spring came again, as it always did, melting the snow and coaxing life back into the frozen ground. Elias visited in April and then again in June, bringing news from Cedar Falls and the wider world. He'd found a community there, friends and neighbors who knew him as Elias the freighter, not Elias, the man whose wife had been cruel and whose daughter had fled to the mountains. On Mara's 19th birthday, he brought her a gift, a beautifully tooled leather journal and a set of pencils. "For recording your life up here," he explained. "So someday, when you're old and gray, you can remember what it was like to be young and brave and free." Mara held the journal like it was made of gold. That night, by firelight, she made her first entry. She wrote about the mountain and the cabin, about Cole and her father and the life she'd built from broken pieces. She wrote about Vivian too, not with anger, but with something like pity for a woman who'd been so determined to make others small that she'd made herself smaller in the process. And she wrote about the future, about the cabin she and Cole were planning, about the life she was building, about the person she'd become, and the person she was still becoming. Summer passed in a blur of work and long golden days. Mara and Cole cleared the site for her future cabin, laying the groundwork for something that might be built next year, or the year after, or whenever she was ready. The work itself was the point, building toward a future while being fully present in the now. In August, they took a trip down to Cedar Falls to visit Elias. The town was smaller than Coleridge, nestled in a green valley where the mountains met the plains. Elias had a neat little house and a thriving business, and he showed Mara around with obvious pride. "You could come here sometimes," he suggested hopefully. "Stay for a week or two in the summer when the weather's nice. I'd like to have you around more." "I'd like that too," Mara agreed. "But the mountain's still home." "I know," Elias smiled. "Just nice to have you close enough to visit without risking frostbite." On their last night in Cedar Falls, Elias pulled Mara aside. "You're truly happy, aren't you? This life with Cole, the mountain, all of it?" "I am, Papa. Happier than I ever dreamed I could be." "Then that's all I needed to know." Elias hugged her tightly. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Mara. The strength you've shown, the life you've built. She'd be bursting with pride." The journey back up the mountain felt like coming home in the deepest sense. As the trail climbed and the air grew thinner and colder, Mara felt her spirit expand. This was where she belonged, in the high country, where the air was clean and the work was hard, and she could be exactly who she was without apology or explanation. That fall, as they prepared once again for winter, Mara realized something. She no longer thought of herself as the girl Cole had rescued. She was a woman who'd chosen this life deliberately, who'd turned tragedy into transformation, who'd learned that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about putting yourself back together afterward, different but whole. On the first snow of the season, Mara stood on the porch watching white flakes drift down from a pearl-gray sky. Cole came to stand beside her, his presence as familiar and comforting as the mountain itself. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Mara thought about everything that had led her here: Vivian's cruelty, her father's blindness, the porcelain bowl that had shattered and somehow set her free. Thought about the scared 16-year-old girl who'd walked up this mountain not knowing if she'd survive. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." Cole's hand found hers, rough and warm and steady. "Good, because I can't imagine this place without you anymore." They stood together as snow covered the world in silence and peace, two people who'd found each other in the midst of their separate storms and built something better than either could have created alone. The mountains stretched out around them, beautiful and harsh and honest, offering no easy answers but infinite possibilities to those brave enough to claim them. And Mara Hartwell, who'd once believed she was worthless and clumsy and destined to fail, knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself. Not because she'd run away from something, but because she'd run towards something better. And now, with land in her name and skills in her hands and a future spread out before her like fresh snow waiting for tracks, she was finally, completely, gloriously free. The mountain had stripped away everything false and shown her what was real. It had taught her that kindness wasn't earned but deserved, that mistakes were lessons, not failures, that strength came from standing back up, from trying again, from refusing to let anyone make you small. As winter closed in around the cabin and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mara squeezed Cole's hand and smiled. Whatever came next, more winters, more challenges, more chances to grow and learn and become, she would face it the way the mountain had taught her, with honesty, with courage, and with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned her own worth. She was home, and she was free, and that was more than enough.